Hi, everyone. Today we're going over Chapter 11, the urinary system. As always, the first section is always about an overview on the functions and the general structures. So the urinary system plays a major role in maintaining the salt-water pH homeostasis of the blood. It carries out excretion, which is the removal of metabolic wastes from the body. Metabolic wastes are byproducts of the cells and tissues' normal activities. All of our cells and tissues generate this waste, and we have to get rid of it somehow. Our urinary system helps with that. And excretion is performed by the formation and discharge of urine from the body. So we're going to go over some general functions, and then later in the chapter, we'll go over them in a little bit more detail. But excretion is the first one. Most metabolic wastes are nitrogenous, just means they're made of nitrogen. Urea, creatinine, ammonium, and uric acid are examples. The main nitrogenous waste of metabolism is urea. The breakdown of amino acids, which are those proteins that we eat all day, every day. The breakdown of these in the liver releases ammonia, which is very toxic. However, our liver combines ammonia with the carbon dioxide that our tissues produce to produce urea, which is much less harmful. Uremia is elevated levels of urea in the blood. This can cause cardiac arrhythmia, vomiting, respiratory problems, and potentially death, like anything else if it's left untreated. The kidneys also secrete creatinine, which results from a breakdown of creatine phosphate, an energy storage molecule in muscles, and uric acid, which comes from the metabolic processing of nucleotides, which is what our DNA is made out of. Both molecules are insoluble, which means crystals form if too much is present in the blood. If we get crystals in our blood, blood stops flowing. That causes other problems. And gout is a collection of uric acid crystals in the joints. Water-salt balance is another general function of the urinary system. So salts, such as sodium chloride, have the ability to influence the rate and direction of osmosis. Osmosis is just the diffusion of water. Therefore, the more salts there are in the blood, the greater the blood volume and the greater the blood pressure. So in general, we remember this by saying salt sucks, which means wherever salt is, it's going to want water to dilute it. So it's going to cause osmosis. You can see in that picture, there's a semi-permeable membrane. All those water molecules are on the left. There's salt on the right. Salt is going to pull those water molecules through that semi-permeable membrane and cause osmosis. By regulating the concentration of sodium and potassium in the blood, the kidneys regulate blood pressure. We'll get into the mechanism of that later. The kidneys also maintain the appropriate levels of other ions, such as bicarbonate and calcium. Acid-base balance is another general function of the urinary system. A healthy blood pH is about 7.4. 7.35 to 7.45 is the range, but it's still a tiny range, and the average is 7.4. The kidneys monitor and help control pH by excreting hydrogen ions and absorbing bicarbonate ions as needed. Urine usually has a pH of 6 or lower because our diet contains acidic foods. The secretion of hormones. Kidneys release renin, which is an enzyme that will lead to aldosterone secretion. Aldosterone is the hormone. It's produced by the adrenal glands, which lie on top of the kidneys. It regulates water-salt balance of the blood. The kidneys also produce a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO for short. It stimulates the production of red blood cells. The kidneys also reabsorb filtered nutrients and participate in the synthesis of vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually a hormone that promotes calcium ion absorption from the digestive tract. Here are all of the general organs of the urinary system. It's actually pretty simple compared to some of the other systems we've gone over. But the adrenal glands are on top. They produce aldosterone, among other things. Then you have the kidneys produce urine. Ureters transport the urine. Urinary bladder stores the urine. And then the urethra is the tube that passes the urine to the outside of the body. Kidneys. There is one on each side of the vertebral column, partially protected by the rib cage. It is due to the liver. The right kidney is positioned slightly lower than the left. They're bean-shaped and reddish-brown in color. If you think of kidney beans, those are literally exactly what our kidneys look like, reddish-brown in color, just tinier. covered by something called the renal capsule. The concave side of the kidney is where the renal artery enters, and a renal vein and the ureter exit. The renal artery transports blood to the kidneys. The renal vein carries filtered blood away from the kidneys. So this is if we cut a kidney in half, front to back. You open it up. This is what it looks like. There's a bunch of stuff inside. The outside is called the cortex. The whole inside is called the medulla. You can see the renal pyramids inside the medulla. And then there's the renal pelvis, leads to the ureter. That's where the urine flows to the next stage. So ureters conduct urine from the kidneys to the bladder. The wall of the ureters have 3 layers: an inner mucosa, a smooth muscle layer, and an outer fibrous coat of connective tissue. Peristaltic contractions in the ureter push urine into the bladder even when laying down. So these are all involuntary contractions. This happens automatically in our bodies. The bladder stores urine. It has 3 openings, 2 for the ureters, one coming in on each side from each kidney, and 1 for the urethra, which drains the bladder. There are folds in the mucosa of the bladder called rugae. They disappear as the bladder enlarges. So you can think of the bladder like a balloon. When it's small and there's hardly any urine in it, there's these folds in it, kind of like the stomach has, the rugae. And then when it stretches out, those rugae go away and everything flattens out. And it's made of a layer of transitional epithelium. That's what enables the bladder to stretch. Small folds of the bladder mucosa act as a valve to prevent backward flow of urine back into the ureter. There are 2 sphincters where the urethra exits the bladder. The internal sphincter is composed of smooth muscle and is involuntarily controlled. You can't control that one. The external sphincter is the one you can control. It's composed of skeletal muscle, and that's the one when you really gotta go, you squeeze it to make sure you don't go until you're actually ready. And then when you are ready to go, you can consciously relax and let the urine out of your body. Urination is officially called micturition. When the urinary bladder fills with urine, stretch receptors are activated. These receptors send sensory nerve signals to the spinal cord. Subsequently, motor nerve impulses from the spinal cord cause the urinary bladder to contract and the sphincters to relax so that urination is possible. The brain has control over micturition by controlling that external urethral sphincter. The urethra is the tube that extends from the urinary bladder to an external opening. The short length of the female urethra makes women more susceptible to infections. In males, as the urethra leaves the male urinary bladder, it is encircled by the prostate gland. The prostate sometimes enlarges, which would restrict the flow of urine in the urethra. And then we're going to talk more specifically about the structure of the kidney. So there are 3 regions. That renal cortex is the outer layer that dips down in between the inner layer, called the renal medulla. The renal medulla consists of cone-shaped tissue masses called renal pyramids, and the renal pelvis is a central space that is continuous with the ureter. The cortex is that outside, kind of looks like a muscly layer. The pyramids, they're shaped like pyramids. That whole part is the medulla. And all of that drains into the renal pelvis, which then moves on to the ureter. So nephrons are the actual individual cells of the kidney. Kidneys are composed of over 1 million nephrons. The nephrons filter the blood and produce urine. Several nephrons empty urine into one collecting duct, and then the collecting ducts empty into that renal pelvis for the urine to move on. And then you can see from the picture, part of the nephron lies in the renal cortex, and there is part of a nephron that dips into the renal medulla. Blood supply for each nephron. So from the renal artery, a afferent arteriole transports blood to a glomerulus, which is a knot of capillaries inside a glomerular capsule, or the Bowman's capsule. And then you have an efferent arteriole that carries blood away from the glomerulus. So these kind of can be compared to the alveoli. in the lungs that are covered in capillaries, and that's where gas exchange happens. The kidneys have nephrons, and each nephron has a glomerulus, which is that little knot of capillaries, and that's where a bunch of exchange happens between the nephrons and the bloodstream. So the efferent arteriole empties into the peritubular capillary network, which surrounds the rest of the nephron. Then the blood goes into a venule that carries the blood into the renal vein and back into the system towards the heart. The glomerular or Bowman's capsule. The outer layer is made of squamous epithelial cells. So if you'll remember, those are all flat cells. The inner layer is made of podocytes that cover the glomerulus, leaving pores that allow molecules from the blood inside the glomerulus out into the glomerular capsule and into the nephron system. The proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT, as we will call it for short, is the next part of the nephron. Its function is to reabsorb solutes and water before the urine passes out of the body. Its cuboidal epithelium cells have numerous microvilli that form a brush border, which increases its surface area, like the villi and the microvilli of the small intestine. The loop of Henle is the next part. So you can see, we are going in order. We have the glomerulus. Things pass into the glomerular capsule. Whatever that stuff is now passes through the proximal tubule. Then it will go through the loop, which dips all the way down into the renal medulla and then comes back up into the cortex. So the loop of Henle has a descending lib, descending means down, and an ascending lib coming back up. Each has different permeabilities to water and solutes. So different water, different ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, they each pass through at a different place in the pathway. The distal convoluted tubule, or the DCT for short. Its primary function is ion exchange between the blood and the renal tubule. The distal convoluted tubules of several nephrons enter one collecting duct, which will carry the urine to the renal pelvis. Collecting duct, more resorption and secretion of ions and water before urine exits the body. So that collecting duct is that last part of the pathway before the urine goes into the renal pelvis and to the ureter and to the rest of the path. So like you said, the location of structures, part of the nephron is in the cortex, the glomerulus, and both the DCT and the PCT are found in the cortex. And then the loop of Henle and the collecting duct, they dip into the medulla, into that middle portion of the renal pyramid. Formation of urine happens in steps. Glomerular filtration is the first step. Tubular reabsorption is the second step. Tubular secretion is the third step. We'll take these in order. So glomerular filtration occurs when the blood enters the glomerulus via the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole has a larger diameter than the efferent arteriole, resulting in an increase in glomerular blood pressure. This increased blood pressure forces more fluid and molecules to leave the glomerulus than in typical capillaries. This fluid is called the glomerular filtrate. This is what enters the Bowman's capsule and starts its journey throughout the nephron. This process is called filtration because large molecules and formed elements are unable to pass through the capillary wall. They stay in the bloodstream. They don't go into the capsule. In effect, then, blood in the glomerulus has two portions, the filterable components and the non-filterable components. The stuff that stays in the bloodstream, stuff that gets passed on to the nephron that will eventually pass out of our bodies. The filterable components, water, nitrogenous wastes, nutrients, and ions like salt. The non-filterable blood components, those that are too big and stay in the bloodstream, are the formed elements like blood cells, platelets, plasma proteins. The non-filterable components leave the glomerulus by way of the efferent arteriole. Second step, tubular reabsorption. Molecules are passively and actively reabsorbed from the nephron into the blood of the peritubular capillary network. Sodium is actively transported by one of two ways. Symport means it's coupled to the movement of larger solutes like amino acids or glucose. Antiport moves sodium into the cell while transporting hydrogen out of the cell. This also regulates the pH because the movement of hydrogen ions outward reduces the acidity of blood. Remember, hydrogen is the ion that is responsible for pH. More hydrogen ions, it's more acidic. Less hydrogen ions is less acidic and more basic. Sodium, sorry, I already went through this. As sodium is being moved, chloride follows it passively. Sodium and chloride are attracted to each other. So if sodium's going somewhere, chloride wants to follow because it wants to donate its extra electron to it. The reabsorption of salt increases the osmolarity of the blood compared with the filtrate. Therefore, water moves passively from the tubule into the blood. About 65% of sodium is reabsorbed at the PCT. Remember what we said, salt sucks. Salt will suck that water. And nutrients such as glucose and amino acids are reabsorbed at the PCT. Glucose is normally reabsorbed completely. There is a plentiful supply of carrier proteins that will carry the glucose. And then that is a picture of all of the various ions and solutes and where they can cross over. You can see there's the glomerular capsule, and then the PCT, there's a lot that gets reabsorbed. And then the loop of Henle has its own, just a few. And then the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule, has a smaller list, sodium, chloride, bicarbonate, water. And then the collecting ducts has its own solutes that cross there as well. Diabetes is when blood glucose levels are above normal and glucose appears in the urine, because it shouldn't. It should get completely reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. The glucose transporters are overwhelmed. They can't reabsorb all of the glucose in the filtrate. So the presence of excess glucose in the filtrate raises its osmolarity, and the frequent urination and increased thirst experienced by people with untreated diabetes are due to less water being reabsorbed from the filtrate back into the blood. And the third step is tubular secretion. So the second way by which substances move from blood to the tubular fluid, the first is filtration. Substances don't move during filtration, or we don't count that. Hydrogen, creatinine, and drugs such as penicillin are secreted into the fluid during this step. It occurs along the length of the kidney tubule. In the end, urine contains substances that have been filtered but not reabsorbed, plus whatever has been secreted. I will link this in because this was a good website. This was a good video. Section 11.4, the kidneys in homeostasis. Every single system in our body maintains homeostasis. So the urinary system works with all of these other systems to maintain homeostasis. We will go through a lot of them. So kidneys excrete waste molecules. The liver produces urea, like we said. Muscles make creatinine, and all body cells make uric acid. These wastes are carried by the cardiovascular system to the kidneys, which excrete them. They are assisted by the sweat glands in the skin, which excrete sweat. Sweat is a mixture of water, salt, and some urea. In times of kidney failure, urea is actually excreted by the sweat glands and forms uremic frost on the skin. This is very rare and very extreme cases. Water-salt balance. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is a region of contact between the afferent arteriole and the DCT. When blood volume, and therefore blood pressure, falls too low for filtration to occur, The juxtaglomerular apparatus can respond by secreting renin. Renin is an enzyme that ultimately leads to the secretion of aldosterone by the adrenal glands. So, there's your picture of the efferent arteriole actually touching the DCT, and that's the area called the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Aldosterone is a hormone that regulates the reabsorption of sodium and water in the DCT. It promotes ion exchange at the DCT. Potassium ions are excreted and sodium ions are resorbed into the blood. The release of aldosterone is initiated by the kidneys. Antidiuretic hormone. Without ADH, water cannot be resorbed in the DCT. ADH is produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the posterior pituitary gland in response to an increase in that blood osmolarity. Water then moves from the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct into the blood. ANH, atrial natriuretic hormone. This is a hormone secreted by the atria of the heart when they are stretched due to increased blood volume. It inhibits the secretion of renin and aldosterone. As a result, it promotes a process called natriuresis, which is the excretion of sodium into the urine. Normally, salt reabsorption creates an osmotic gradient that causes water to be reabsorbed. So ANH causes water excretion too. If blood pressure is too low, exchange across tissue capillary walls cannot take place, nor is glomerular filtration possible in the kidneys. This decreases sodium levels in the blood, and this can occur due to prolonged heavy sweating if we're working out too hard without having enough salt and electrolytes in our bodies. Blood pressure falls and the renin-aldosterone sequence begins. The kidneys then increase sodium reabsorption, conserving as much as possible until the osmolarity of the blood and the blood pressure return to normal. This is why a marathon runner should not drink too much pure water. It can dilute the body's remaining sodium supply and disrupt water-salt balance. And then sports drinks, which contain electrolytes that we need, contain both sodium and water. They may also be high in calories and are not recommended for exercise lasting less than 90 minutes. So we're going to watch a little video about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which is the pathway.
In this video, we will discuss the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And before getting into all the complex stuff, let's have an overview of this system. So whenever your blood pressure falls, known as hypotension, the kidneys are able to sense it and they activate the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which acts on kidney as well as the blood vessels to restore the blood pressure to the normal. Most of you know the kidneys are supplied by a set of renal arteries, which supply almost 20 to 25% of whole cardiac output to kidneys. This blood reaches the glomeruli through the afferent arterioles and leaves the glomeruli through the efferent arterioles. These cells you see are the juxtaglomerular cells. The word juxta means near, hence these cells are located near the glomerulus. These cells secrete a substance known as prorenin. And hypotension is a main stimulator of converting prorenin into renin. Renin is an enzyme which acts on angiotensinogen. The word angio means vessels. The word tensinogen means a substance which constricts the vessels. It is a plasma protein which is synthesized in the liver. Renin converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. The next step takes place in the lungs when the enzyme angiotensin converting enzyme acts on angiotensin 1 and converts it into angiotensin 2. The angiotensin 2 is a powerful vasoconstrictor which mediates the effects of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Let's look at the effects of angiotensin 2 on blood vessels. As I said, angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor. It constricts both the arteries as well as the veins. The constriction of the arteries leads to a total peripheral resistance increase, And the constriction of veins lead to increase in the venous return to the heart. Both these mechanisms increase the blood pressure of the person. This effect is rapid and takes a few minutes. Now let's look at the effects of angiotensin 2 on the kidneys. These effects are slow and take a few days to have their maximum effect. Angiotensin 2 acts on kidney in two ways. The first is the direct mechanism. As most of you know, the GFR of the kidney is directly proportional to the blood flow through the kidneys. The blood enters the glomeruli through the afferent arterioles, and angiotensin 2, being a powerful vasoconstrictor, constricts these afferent arterioles mainly and decreases the blood flow through the kidneys. This results in a decrease in the GFR of the kidney, which results in a decrease in the urine output through the kidney. Now, second is the indirect effect, in which the angiotensin 2 acts on the adrenal gland and releases aldosterone. Aldosterone in turn acts on the kidney and increases the sodium reabsorption as well as the water reabsorption. So we have a decreased urine output, increase in the water reabsorption, and increase in the sodium reabsorption. All these effects lead to an increase in the extracellular fluid of the body, an increase in the capillary pressure, and a long-term increase in the arterial pressure. So to summarize, let's suppose a person gets stabbed and he loses a lot of blood. This will lead to a decrease in the blood pressure of the person known as hypotension, which is a potent trigger of activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. The RAAS further acts on the blood vessels as well as the kidneys and normalizes the blood pressure. So this was all about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Thank you so much for watching this video.
I like the animation of that video.
I got
Diuretics are a substance that will increase the flow of urine. Alcohol causes diuresis by inhibiting the secretion of ADH. Caffeine increases the rate of glomerular filtration and decreases tubular reabsorption of sodium. Diuretic drugs for high blood pressure also decrease the tubular reabsorption of sodium. A decrease in water reabsorption and a decrease in blood volume, and then pressure follows. There would be a decrease in blood pressure. So normal pH for body fluids, like I said, is 7.35 to 7.45. This is the pH at which our proteins, like cellular enzymes, function properly. If it goes below 7.35, it is called acidosis. If it goes above 7.45, a person can have alkalosis. Excuse me. Ingested foods add basic or acidic substances into the blood. So does metabolism. The pH of the body fluids is maintained via several mechanisms: the acid-base buffer systems, the respiratory center, and the kidneys. Acid-base buffer systems. A buffer can either take up excess hydrogen ions to bring something back to neutral, or can take up excess hydroxide ions if the pH is too high, bring it back to that 7.35 to 7.45 range. One of the most important buffer systems in the blood is a combination of carbonic acid and bicarbonate ions. So when too much hydrogen enters the blood, this reaction occurs. Hydrogen combines with bicarbonate to make carbonic acid. When hydroxide enters the blood, the opposite reaction occurs. Hydroxide, well, technically it's not the opposite, but hydroxide mixes with carbonic acid, and those bonds get broken and rearranged to make bicarbonate ions and water. The kidneys are slower than other mechanisms, like respiration, but more powerful. They resorb bicarbonate ions and secrete hydrogen ions as needed. If the blood is acidic, hydrogen ions are excreted and bicarbonate ions are reabsorbed. Ammonia provides another means of buffering and removing the hydrogen ions in urine. The kidneys assist other systems. They secrete the erythropoietin, a hormone that stimulates the production of red blood cells in the red bone marrow. They regulate the amount of calcium in the blood, converting vitamin D to its active form, which is needed for calcium absorption in the digestive tract. They also regulate the excretion of electrolytes, including calcium. The kidneys regulate the sodium and potassium content of the blood, and these ions are needed for nerve conduction and contraction of the heart and other muscles in the body. And disorders is always the last section of our chapters. So many types of illnesses, especially diabetes and hypertension, cause progressive renal disease and renal failure. Urethritis is an infection of the urethra. Cystitis is an infection of the urinary bladder. Pyelonephritis is an infection of the actual kidney. Kidney stones, urinary tract infections, an enlarged prostate gland, pH imbalances, or an intake of too much calcium can lead to kidney stones. These are hard granules made of calcium phosphate, uric acid, and protein. They form in the renal pelvis and usually pass unnoticed into the urine flow, but if they're too large, they can get stuck and cause pain. If you've ever had a kidney stone, you know how painful they are. A reverse pressure builds up and will destroy the nephrons in your kidney. Urinalysis is the analysis of urine. One of the first signs of nephron damage is when albumin, white blood cells, or even red blood cells show up in the urine. A urinalysis can detect urine abnormalities. A medical professional can actually tell a lot from your urine. Uremia is an accumulation of urea and other wastes in the blood. It occurs when kidney damage is so extensive that more than 2/3 of the nephrons are inoperative. Kidney damage, although nitrogenous wastes can cause serious damage, the retention of water and salts after kidney damage is of greater concern. The latter causes edema, which is fluid accumulation in the body tissues. An abnormal ion balance can lead to the loss of consciousness and heart failure. Hemodialysis, either an artificial kidney machine or continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, called CAPD for short. Dialysis is the diffusion of dissolved molecules through a semi-permeable membrane that has pore sizes that only allow small molecules to pass through it. In an artificial kidney machine, the patient's blood is passed through a membranous tube that is in contact with the dialysis solution, or a dialysate. And dialysis is actually very, very common. So we're going to watch this, an overview, an animation of dialysis, so I do better with animations so I can see what's actually happening.
Kidneys, those fist-sized organs that are shaped like beans. They are kind and hard-working organs located in your upper abdominal area, attached to the back of the abdominal cavity on either side of your vertebral column. Your kidneys have 4 important roles, so luckily we have 2 of them. They are essential for excretion, cleaning your body every day as it passes through them by removing urea and other chemicals. However, sometimes your kidneys may fall sick. This may be self-inflicted, such as drinking excessive amounts of alcohol or taking drugs, or might occur as a result of another illness, such as diabetes, or experiencing severe injury that leads to a bacterial infection. This can cause kidney failure, which is when your kidney cannot function properly anymore, leading to a buildup of waste products in your body. As you can imagine, these waste products are dangerous, and them staying in your body for too long can cause serious damage. To help relieve the kidneys of this duty, patients can undergo dialysis for about 4 hours, 3 times a week. So what happens during dialysis? Patients sit in chairs, much like a lounge chair. A needle is inserted into the patient's vein, and untreated blood starts flowing into the dialysis unit. Let's follow this blood to see how it gets cleaned. A pump pushes the blood through the dialysis tubing, which is partially permeable to ensure that large particles like blood cells and proteins cannot leave the tubing. The tubing is suspended in dialysis fluid, or dialysate. Dialysis fluid is a special solution of pure water, electrolytes, and salts. It contains no urea or waste products. No waste in the dialysis fluid means as the blood flows through the tubing, a concentrated gradient is created, allowing waste products to be removed from the blood and into the dialysis fluid by diffusion. The dialysis fluid also contains electrolytes and salts to help correct any other imbalances in the blood that may have arisen from the kidney failure, also making use of concentration gradients and diffusion. Sometimes glucose is also included in the dialysis fluid, either to remove excessive fluid from the blood or to provide the blood with more glucose if it's lacking. Once the blood is thoroughly filtered and cleaned, it returns to the patient through their artery. The used dialysis fluid is then disposed of. While dialysis can replace the work of a failed kidney, it can be very uncomfortable and time consuming. For this reason, some people instead opt for kidney transplants. However, while these prove to be a much better long-term solution, as you will not have to eat a restricted diet or experience any discomfort, they tend to be very expensive, and finding a matching donor tends to be very difficult. Even if both conditions are met, you still might be at risk of your body tissues rejecting the transplanted kidney, which will require you to take immunosuppressive drugs. So remember to take good care of your kidneys as they help keep your body clean and healthy.
The video. Thank you.
And then replacing a kidney. Patients with renal failure sometimes undergo a kidney transplant operation. As with all organ transplants, there is the possibility of organ rejection. The current 1-year survival rate is actually 97% if the kidney is received from a relative, and 90% if it is received from a non-relative. So kidney transplants are actually very, very successful relative to other organs. That is it for the urinary system. I'll see you next time for Chapter 12.